we're going to do now is a panel discussion where we would like to multilaterally have a chance to reflect, on the one hand, the past and historically actually the significance of the fall of the wall, as well as the future. We're going to have in total actually 5 panelists for an interactive discussion. My colleagues at the same time are going to help us so that we can actually have the live TV in the background, and without sound we can also observe some of the ceremonies taking place. The panel discussion is going to include, as I said, 5 individuals, some of whom you've had the chance to get to know, some of them not yet. First of all, for those who we have not yet had a chance to get to know, I'm very happy, ladies and gentlemen, that after having a wonderful encounter in Montenegro earlier this year, where we met for the first time, we've been blessed and also honored by receiving once again at the Institute for Cultural Diplomacy, this time in Berlin, Judge Fausto Pocar. Judge Fausto Pocar is an Italian jurist. He's a professor of international law at the University of Milan, and from 1984 until 2000, he was an elected member of the Human Rights Committee of the United Nations, serving as the committee's chair from 1991 until 1992. Judge Pocar served on the Italian delegation to the UN General Assembly in New York and to the Commission on Human Rights in Geneva several times. In 1999, he was appointed as judge to the International Criminal Tribunal and the former Yugoslavia, ICTY, and was president of this tribunal from November 2005 until November 2008. He's also a member of the Appeals Chamber of the International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda, ICTR, since the year 2000. We're very happy to have the judge here, and in a moment I will ask him to join us on the stage together with the other panelists. And in the meantime, are we arranging the stage as well, or? That's okay, I'll step back, and I think we need some more chairs as well for the 5. And we have to multitask this evening. We have a very busy evening. I'm secondly very happy to introduce Mr. László Kovács, who was born in 1939 and is a Hungarian politician as well as a diplomat, former European Commissioner for Taxation and Customs Union. He was the Foreign Minister of Hungary twice, from 1994 until 1998, and from the years 2002 until 2004. He also served as chairman of the Hungarian Socialist Party, MSZP, from 1998 until 2004. And I will allow him himself in the panel to tell us a little bit about the special role that he also had in the fall of the Berlin Wall and the events that unfolded both before as well as surrounding that. In addition to these 2 new panelists, we will also have the President Vicente Fox, and I'm very pleased at this chance also to include a multilateral discussion with you, in addition to the unilateral speech. We've already had the chance to hear a little bit of the background of President Fox, as well as Bertie Ahern, the former Prime Minister of Ireland. And I'd ask now, since it looks as if we are almost set up, if the panelists could please join me on the stage. So Judge Fausto Pocar, Mr. László Kovács, President Vicente Fox, as well as Mr. Bertie Ahern. If you could please join us on the stage, we're going to begin the multilateral discussion, again reflecting on the fall of the Berlin Wall, as well as a world without walls and the direction that we're going in. So if I could please ask the panelists to join me on the stage, we will begin momentarily. Ladies and gentlemen, as we read the title of the events over the last 4 days, I think it shows us a little bit the idea behind this discussion as well. A world without walls, opportunities for peace building in a time of global insecurity. I'd like to begin this discussion, first of all, by reflecting a little bit of the past. And Mr. László Kovács, I'm very happy that you decided to join us. I'm very happy that you gave us the honor. I think the last time we collaborated was in Brussels. And I'd be very grateful if we could begin with your own reflections on actually the events that unfolded 25 years ago, and also the very unique role and perspective that you actually had in the process. So maybe we could give a welcome not only for Mr. László Kovács, but all of the panelists as a way of welcoming them to the stage and beginning the panel. Please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. First of all, thank you for the invitation. I do feel honored and privileged. because it gives me a chance to remember the historic year of 1989 and the role of Hungary, and to share with you my memories about the role Hungary, a Central European country of 10 million, a relatively small country, could play and contribute to the fall of the Berlin Wall, to the unification of Germany, and also to the unification of Europe. I want to tell you that in the summer of 1989, Hungary was facing a brutal challenge, which was rapidly getting more and more serious. Thousands of East German tourists gathered and settled around the embassy and the consulate of the Federal Republic of Germany, making explicitly clear that they didn't want to go home to the country of Erich Honecker, to the DDR. And they will go to the Federal Republic of Germany. The problem was that their passports, however, were not valid for Austria, were not valid for Germany, were valid only for the Soviet bloc countries like Hungary. A treaty on tourism between Hungary and the DDR did not allow the two countries to let the citizens of each other to go to any country for which they did not have valid travel documents, but had to extradite them to the country of their citizenship. A very brutal measure. The government of Prime Minister Miklos Németh made a decision that took politicians, experts, and even the public by surprise. Instead of extradition of the refugees from DDR, we opened the border with Austria on the 10th of September and let the East German refugees leave Hungary and via Austria to go to the Federal Republic. In a few weeks, more than 60,000 refugees went to the other part of Germany. Even years later, I was frequently put the following question: why did Hungary, a member of the Warsaw Pact at that time, a member of Comecon at that time, with 100,000 strong Soviet troops on its territory, took side with the Federal Republic of Germany, member of NATO and member of the European communities, in the conflict with the DDR over the East German refugees? The answer is in the long reform process which took place in Hungary. It started in the late 60s in the economic policy with cautious and step-by-step introducing some market elements. After the Helsinki Conference in 1975, the reforms appeared also in the cultural policy, opening the door for the cultural values of democratic countries of the Western Hemisphere. In the 80s, step-by-step opening to the West, not to the East that the current government is doing, but to the West. It could be seen in the foreign policy of Hungary. In 1982, we joined the IMF and the World Bank. In the same time, with the help of Chancellor Schmidt, we started confidential talks with Commissioner Ahern, a German social democrat of the European Economic Community, about trade relations and industrial cooperation. In 1988, these talks resulted in an unprecedented agreement, with even establishing diplomatic relations between Hungary, still member of the Comecon and the Warsaw Pact, and the European communities. From 1984, we had regular highest level exchanges with most of the countries of the Euro-Atlantic community, and we re-established diplomatic relations with the State of Israel, with the Republic of South Africa, with the Republic of Korea, and the Vatican. There was no other Soviet bloc countries that had similar steps, that had such an openness in their international relations. On the 1st of January 1988, Hungary introduced a new legislation on the passport system unprecedented in the Soviet bloc. All Hungarian citizens got a passport valid for all the countries of the world without any exit visa. And in the spring of 1989, Hungary joined the Geneva Convention on Refugees, which guaranteed protection for those persons who had to leave their homeland for political reasons. Also in the spring of 1989, the Hungarian government decided that the Iron Curtain on the border between Hungary and Austria should be demolished, having in mind that it was in contradiction with the openness of Hungary. That certainly further encouraged tens of thousands of DDR citizens to come to Hungary and to wait for the chance when they can cross the border. And that saved us for a danger of human catastrophe, what these tens of thousands of DDR refugees could result, and also provided a window of opportunity to make our own contribution to the fall of the Berlin Wall. Having in mind this 2 decades-long reform process and the openness in our international relations, as well as the high international prestige of Hungary, which we wanted to maintain, there was no doubts in the Hungarian government and in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs that we have to open the border. We found a solution in compliance with international law, that is to suspend the application of the relevant paragraphs of the Treaty on Tourism between Hungary and DDR. And we certainly made a careful risk analysis and found that the Soviet Union will not interfere, as all the Soviet politicians and diplomats who we contacted kept repeating that it was a matter of the 2 German states and Hungary. So it was clear that they would not interfere. And we also found that East Germany had no possibility to retaliate. We expected certainly only some strong statements blaming our country. And that was really the case when they did what they did together with some other hardliner countries of the Soviet bloc, calling Hungary as the traitor of socialism. On the 8th of September, we officially informed the East German government about the decision to open the Hungarian-Austrian border. It was announced on the Hungarian television on the 10th of, in the evening on the 10th of September, and at midnight, the border was open, and as I already mentioned, more than 60,000 East German citizens left for the Federal Republic of Germany via Austria. And as we kept the borders between Hungary and Austria open, it made the Berlin Wall of no effect anymore, and finally resulted in its fall. 1 year later, the 2 German states united, what contributed to the unification of Europe, and it also paved the way to the enlargement of NATO and the European Union. Today, reunited Germany is a strong and stable democracy with an economy of high performance. Germany is the strongest supporter of the further deepening of European integration and the strengthening of the transatlantic community. We Hungarians have received the strongest and most effective support in our Euro-Atlantic integration from Germany, which is also the #1 foreign investor in Hungary and our most important export market. We highly appreciate the more than 1,000-year-long historic links and the cultural relations between the people of our countries. To conclude, I want to express my deep conviction that in spite of all the problems that we have, our continent is stronger, more stable, more safe, and more united than ever before. The Transatlantic Alliance and the European Union, based on our shared values, are able to cope with all the global challenges that we are facing. We Hungarians can be proud that with the opening of our borders for East German refugees 25 years ago, we have contributed to the positive changes in Europe. I want to congratulate the ICTY and to Mark personally for organizing this conference and having this fantastic list of speakers. The fall of the Berlin Wall certainly, and there was a general consensus among all the participants, had a positive impact on Europe and beyond. And I also felt a common understanding that we still have walls which are to fall, and the conference has provided a lot of interesting ideas how to do it, how to bring these walls down, and how to avoid wars that still divide the globe, that still divide the humanity. So thank you very much for the invitation, and thank you very much for your patience.
Thank you very much, László Kovács. Judge Fausto Pocar, you are internationally, I think, or definitely one of the most respected experts and actually authorities when it comes to international law and human rights, as well as one of the most highly commended, I think, advocates when it comes to really justice and actually human rights promotion. We are very honored once again that you've taken the time to be with us on this historic occasion, and we would be really honored if you'd share with us your perspectives, especially in the framework of, let's say, international law and human rights. Do we live in a world without walls? If we do, what barriers do you think can be taken down through the mechanisms of international law, cultural diplomacy, and beyond? We'd be very, very honored if you could share with us your reflections.
Thank you first for inviting me to this conference, to this panel. On a discussion we have now here on the fall of the wall, I cannot claim, like my colleague László Kovács, that I participated and did something maybe for the fall of the wall, except at the time I was in the Human Rights Committee, a member of the Human Rights Committee, except that I organized, under the umbrella of the United Nations, what was probably the first East-West meeting on human rights in Milan. László Kovács was there, by the by, in '88. It was before the fall of the wall, but I cannot claim this contributed to the fall of the wall, of course. It was just, I say it's just to introduce this subject because you asked me to deal with the international law. And the wall came in those years frequently to the attention of the Human Rights Committee of the United Nations. The Human Rights Committee had to discuss reports from states. And of course, among those states, there were also the Eastern European states. And the question of the relationship, depending on the wall with the West, came into consideration. Among others, it was in those times almost necessary in the United Nations bodies of whatever kind that when there was a Western German, there was also an Eastern German elected in the body. So was it for the International Law Commission, for instance. There were always one Western and one Eastern German. And the Human Rights Committee didn't make an exception. There was a member from Western Germany and one from Eastern Germany. I don't know how they arranged the elections, because the elections would have been free, of course, but that was always the case. And so the question of the relationship, depending also on the wall, came to the attention several times to the committee, especially asking delegations to say what they did to change the situation. Because from the point of view of international law, the main issue with the wall is indeed a clear-cut violations of basic human rights. And the right that comes into consideration is the freedom of movement. All, starting from the Universal Declaration of 48 and later with the Covenant in 66, it's made clear that within a country, people have the right to circulate, to move, and each person, each individual, not citizen or resident or whatever, each individual has the right to leave a country and to return to the country, as the case may be, but especially to leave the country. Now, what happened with the wall? There was no possibility of moving from Eastern Germany to Western Germany, the other way around to a certain extent as well. There was this separation depending on the wall. So from the point of view of international law, there was a clear violations, self-evident violations. And we all know that there was a toll of victims at the wall, of people that tried to escape, to overcome the wall. There was in newspaper all the time when that happened. I mean, and there was quite a number of examples. So this was the concern they came. But freedom of movement is not just one right. It is one right, but affects a number of other rights at the same time. May affect political rights, may affect social and economic rights, because people cannot go abroad to get a different job, for instance, cannot move to have better education. And we are speaking of rights that are not civil and political, but economic and social. And we know that happened with the wall. Now, the wall, it's been said during this conference, was a visible and physical obstacle. But of course, was part of a much longer wall that is forgotten sometimes, was part of a longer wall that was the Iron Curtain. That was also a wall, not necessarily visible, here and there visible, but not necessarily on all the territory. They divided Europe completely into parts. So the fall of the wall had the merit to cancel this huge violation of human rights. But of course, that doesn't mean that every problem is resolved. In a way, it allowed Eastern Europe to take up the principle that was in those times emerging, that is the free circulation of people in Western Europe, which is the basic feature of Western Europe. Western Europe, or Europe now, the European Union, is essentially an area where people move, where everybody can move. But now, what has Europe done? Is it just, this is the good side of it. New countries have benefited of that, but now is Europe erecting a wall, defining a wall outside. We heard during the conference, I referred to even this afternoon, the former Prime Minister of Malta made quite examples of wall that the Union is erecting against the people outside, exactly on freedom of movement, again, on possibility of migrating or moving. And we know that also as to refugees, as asylum seekers, all the structure in the Union regulations that go under the denomination of Dublin 1, Dublin 2, Dublin 3, do not work properly, in fact. And in fact, people that are admitted in one country from outside do not enjoy really the freedom of circulation in the whole area, and this should be probably the case. Now, but this is obvious what happens. Nothing is perfect, but what the aspect that I wanted to underline is this big violation of human rights and the tentative of reducing these violations with allowing but at the end, the other aspects of international law is that behind any wall, there is a general violation of human rights. And the general violation is discrimination, essentially. If one looks at the international instruments, behind any violation of rights, there is a discriminatory approach. If people are not discriminated, there is no violation of rights. Everybody has the same. Maybe high level, low level, depending on the economic progress or the circumstances, but there is no violation, actually. Everybody is equal. The real problem is the discrimination. And here, I think that the only way of approaching this, again, is education. But another thing that I think the fall of the wall has brought is perhaps to establish, and this is a question of culture, a culture, or starting to, a culture of accountability. When there are violations of rights, we need to have a system, whatever the system, judicial, not judicial, parajudicial, but essentially judicial, of accountability. Now, this is a joke for many, because when you speak of accountability, many say, listen, this is an English word that has no equivalent in other languages. You can't translate accountability into French. French would be responsibility. Responsibility is not the case. It's not just responsibility. You translate into Spanish, it doesn't work. Responsibilidad, it's a different concept. So many say, well, accountability, after all, does not exist. If it cannot be translated, it does not exist. But it can be explained, of course, accountability can be explained. Is ownership of anything you do. You are owner of what you do, and you are also responsible for that. You pay the consequences for that. It's not just the responsibility in civil law. And I think that when you have violation of rights, the wall was an egregious violation of rights, what is important is a system of accountability. But accountability means procedures, essentially. Means procedures that allow to bring cases before courts. So, but it started to be a moment in which people felt, well, there must be a system of accountability. And for instance, if we take what happened in Germany, I mean, there was a system of accountability for what was done against, in terms of violation of human rights because of the existence of the wall. And even the system is not perfect, of course, but I think we have to go in that direction. It's the lesson of the fall of the wall, that from the legal point we have to retain and move in that direction. I think these were just considerations, but I think it's important that the world goes towards accountability.
Thank you very much, Judge Pocar. President Fox, in your keynote address, you referred to many walls that currently exist today. Mexico, USA was one of them, a number of others as well. In our discussion earlier this afternoon, we were also speaking about leadership and really what does it take to be a true leader, especially when talking to young leaders in the younger generation. One of the points we were talking about there was really the difference between also managers and leaders. Very often it's said a good manager will maintain a system very well, whereas a good leader will create a system or change a system. In that spirit, where do you see opportunities for walls to be taken down today? If you could list, let's say, maybe 1 to 3 examples where you would say immediately there's action that can be taken in the framework of culture diplomacy or beyond, where do you see the biggest opportunities for us today to try to bring down walls that are currently in existence?
Yeah. Well, at our place in Centro Fox on this foundation, we distinguish or we conceive leadership in maybe in a different way. Because many people question, where are the leaders? We don't have enough leaders. Really, each and every one of us is a leader. Unfortunately, we don't discover that leadership. We don't go within and have a purpose for our life, so we go through life in mediocrity. Number 2, we usually tend to think that leadership is reserved for some very special women or men that are outstanding and they are the leaders. So we renounce to exercise our own leadership and capacities. And finally, we usually think about leaders leading and followers following. And at the very end, we play both roles all the time. We can join in and be leaders for a cause, like those who led the defeat of the Berlin Wall, but also we frequently exercise our leadership and we invite others to join in. But what and where? I think number one is peace. I think that peace is one of the most outstanding environments where we human beings perform at our very best. When we don't have peace, we closely don't have anything. So it's a very special case to work on to build peace. And peace starts within ourselves. Number two, the big injustices that so many human beings have. Access to a job, access to a table with food, access to a better life and a happy life. I think there's where we must concentrate our leadership. Fortunately, the world is finding more and more answers. It's incredible how today the whole region of Africa is going through their best times at the same time that they have the worst problems. But there is economic development and growth that they are enjoying today that never enjoyed before, but at the same time there is conflict. So I would say that being compassionate leadership, working for others should be the key.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Mr. Bertie Ahern, you've had a chance earlier to reflect in a small way on also some of the experiences of Ireland and actually how we can learn from that. And I very often am reminded, it was a couple of years ago when we had our annual conference, you were here in Berlin, and we had a performance of Boney M. And the lead singer is a member of our advisory board, Marcia Bard, and I remember they were singing Belfast. And it really brings us back to the moments not so long ago when in Ireland it wasn't so clear that peace was actually an option, and it wasn't so clear that really reconciliation would be possible. So I just wonder what advice you would offer as we look at situations in the world. We spoke about Cyprus, we spoke about Israel, Palestine, Mexico, so many cases around the world where there are still walls today. What can we learn from the experience of Ireland that might give us some optimism? Because I fear, especially for the younger generations, there's a lot of pessimism, especially when one looks at the tremendous complexity, the status quo in so many cases that doesn't seem to be changing, doesn't seem to be improving. Can you offer us perhaps some optimism from your own experience, really, as a peace builder in this sense, especially the case of Ireland?
Well, I think in our case, having had such a long period of conflict, that people were very skeptical of whether any peace agreement would hold or work. The last opinion poll, about a week before we signed the Good Friday Agreement, 95% of people said they didn't believe it would work, even if we concluded a deal. So talk about pressure. But I think it's, as Vicente Fox has said, like if you get peace, and every little step you build on, every little thing that you can do that can help people to work together. If you can get religious leaders to show that they can tolerate each other, or do economical services, which wasn't something we did very well for generations. If you can get schools, Belfast was an extraordinary place. I mean, many people here will know it well, but for those that don't, I mean, everyone is the same colour. They speak the same language. They live in a relatively small area. Northern Ireland isn't a huge place. But once you say to a person, what area do you live in? What school do you attend? What church have you participated in? Straight away people know what side you're on. So your demarcation was not being in a tribe or in an area that was totally separated. Here it was in a very tight community, and a person on one side of a road could be one side and a person on the other side of another. And of course what happened over the years of the Trouble, that the various paramilitary groups pushed one side, where there was integration, they pushed them out. I think where the hope is, but you know, young people and older people do not want to see their families being killed. Usually, there are some bad people, as has been said earlier on, but usually people do not want to see suffering and mayhem and bombing. And if you try, even slowly, create the conditions of dialogue and compromise and tolerance, where you can get people who were inexplicably opposed to each other to at least debate issues in a sensible way, then things can change. And I've watched it in Northern Ireland, people who would not sit in the one room, who never sat in TV studios to do interviews together, who didn't recognise the judicial system. When they were arrested, they just said they didn't recognise the courts and shouted for whatever organisation they... But when you try to break that down, and of course, I have to say, Mark, you know, there is the area where regimes have to change as well. In Northern Ireland, we had to reform a new police force, which was very painful to the old police force, because you couldn't say that they were all bad. But the reality was that a large proportion of the Catholic nationalist population, even those that were not involved in violence and had never participated in violence, couldn't respect the police force. So for the British government, it were a big step to say that we reform the institutions of the state, because people don't go out and get killed and fight normally without some cause. There are those that do so. So I think the change has to come from both sides. It has to come from the street, that those are involved in violence, but it also has to come from institutions to recognise that there must be some validity, even if they only recognise some validity of moving forward. And I think that change is slower, but I think most of the speakers I heard this weekend here, Mark, spoke about education. And education, you know, is a change maker. And I think as people are more educated, they will participate in dialogue. I can know some people in the audience are probably saying, well, that won't get you far in Syria, but maybe it won't. But I do think that it can work in some places. And I do think ultimately in the Middle East, because I'm sure you have, as I've been struck by the level of educated people that there are there. And I think you can grow that from the last point I'd make, but you do need leadership, not managers. You do need leadership. And ultimately, you have to get people who are brave enough to think differently to what everybody else up along the way believed. If people who are involved in conflict just believe that they can continue the conflict and on we go, you'll never get anywhere. And I do think it is worth investing time in trying to identify leaders of various organisations, even unspeakable ones, and to try to see if you can create some kind of dialogue with them. I am a believer, I think, as you know, Mark, of talking to terrorists. I've done so in several places. It's not something I particularly like, but the alternative of continuing violence is worse. And I think you have to try and cross the line. If Tony Blair and I did not talk to so-called terrorists in Northern Ireland, they'd be still killing each other. I've been involved with organisations with ICTY. I went to talk to them when it wasn't very popular to do so. And I think it's just necessary to try to do that, to win change. A change won't be won sitting at home watching the TV wondering about it. I'm afraid you have to be proactive.
Well, thank you very much. I would like to now give each of the panelists a chance to offer responses to some of the points that were raised from the panel, and maybe to pose a second question for us to consider as well. I think we've had a number of points so far regarding individuals, really reflecting what does it mean to be a leader, what kind of responsibility and actually reflections on responsibility are needed. I'd like to ask a second question that we can respond to as well, if the panelists would like, regarding institutions, in the sense of what institutions can we turn to for support or assistance in dealing with bringing down some of these walls. We've had references to the United Nations, reference to the international courts. Are there institutions currently in existence that perhaps we're not working with as effectively? And would there be a need for new institutions to try to grapple with some of the walls that exist in today's international society? And I'd like to begin perhaps President Vicente Fox, if you could offer any reflections you might have on the points made earlier, and perhaps the second question regarding institutions.
Well, basically, I was thinking about some divide also that we see, me coming from America and also having close relationships with Europe. The two leaders, specifically on economic terms and creating wealth, Europe, the European Union, United States, and North America Trade Agreement, unfortunately seem to be that they are tired, that they're not performing as they used to before. So that leadership is lost today. And the emerging power and leadership on economic terms is coming from the East or from emerging nations that fortunately have taken the challenge of promoting, pushing for economic development and the growth of world economy. So there, I think the dialogue should come back to the cohesiveness that was enjoyed after World War II between the United States and Europe, when that moving, strong, driving idea, the Marshall Plan, invited everybody to unite, to defeat, and to raise up from the war. I really hope that the dialogue can be as strong as it was in the past, and same with the cohesiveness that is needed to do that and perform. Because at the very end, being very pragmatic, we can build up a lot of very spiritual values. We can enjoy our beliefs and our own dogmas, but if we don't have food in our table, we just can't see the capacity to live like real human beings. So to me, that dialogue between not only civilizations, but that dialogue between those who can lead, those who can change, those who can build, is something that we should promote. Build those bridges of understanding, build those possibilities of development.
Pocar, we'd be very grateful for your reflections.
Well, you spoke of institutions and leaders. I don't know whether we need new institutions. I am sometimes skeptical when people say, politicians say, to resolve the problem we have to change the institutions. Because the institutions per se do not change much. You have constitutional reforms sometimes. Are they needed? Or you should apply the Constitution. Before saying we need to reform, have you tried to apply it correctly or not? Many times we see in many countries, I mean, that's what happens. And the same applies to the international system. It's not creating new institutions to resolve problems, but you need leaders. And I think you need leaders not only at the highest level. You need them, but you need leaders at the lower level as well. because a leader at a high level can give some tracks, say, indicate where to go. But then you need those who take these points and translate them into a lower level leadership. And that's cultural in a way, because it needs education of these leaders. Nobody's a leader per se like that. For instance, just mention one thing. I mean, we heard of Ireland. I can make an example with Italy. Italy had a controversy that went on for, well, it goes back to centuries ago with Austria, as we mentioned here in the past. I mean, there was part of Italy was occupied by Austria, and then Italy had formed the state in the 19th century. After the First World War, Italy won the war against Austria. And the fact is that part of the territory that was given to Italy at the time included a part that was German-speaking. It was of culture, German culture, Austrian culture, essentially. And of course, there was a conflict with that. It was not as violent as in Ireland, but was with terrorism, killings, went on after the Second World War for some time. And it had to be resolved. At the end, what resolved the conflict was some leadership in the negotiations. Negotiators that carried the cultural dimension such as to understand what they had to do. And eventually they formed a system of support of minorities that has functioned perfectly. There is no problem nowadays of any kind with these regions. But what is more important, the model was later used as the model in the Declaration of the General Assembly on the Rights to Minorities. It's more or less the same model that was indicated as the best one. But at the basis of it, I participated in drafting that declaration of the United Nations, not in the activity in Italy. But what is important is that you have people participating in the interaction internationally that have sufficient knowledge to understand the cultural problem and to resolve it not just with norms that then you cannot apply, but to resolve giving enough space to the cultural dimension of the problem. Whether you call it cultural diplomacy or not, I do not know. But in fact, it's at the same time a problem of leadership, to having people in delegations that are able to deal with the problem and to lead, to have it accepted at home. So you need a leader to have it accepted at home. Otherwise, you negotiate, you get to the solution, and then the capital will say, no way, we don't accept what we have negotiated. So that's the issue.
Thank you very much. László, Kovács, please.
I would like to offer a rather pragmatic and simple approach. And it is based on my experiences, because the first part of my political career was in a single-party system. In that time, Hungary was a country of the Soviet bloc. We had one leader. I don't think anybody beyond the borders of Hungary could name any other politicians, just János Kádár, who was the leader of the country. And we were relatively fortunate that he was not the type of a dictator. He was in 1956 when the revolution was crushed. And after that, there was a period of 2 years, which was called the period of consolidation, the consolidation of the communist regime again, under the umbrella of the Soviet Union. Then he was really a cruel leader. But later, he became more and more pragmatic and tried to find a way how, in the framework of the one-party system, in the framework of the Soviet bloc, he could provide a life which is acceptable, at least to the majority of the country. So he was a pragmatic person. And now, after the political and economic transition, we have a multi-party democracy with market economy, and we formally correspond to all the norms of the European community. But if someone follows the international press, the media, and the reactions of the other member states of the European Union, then he could come to the conclusion that in Hungary, the parliamentary democracy and the rule of law is working not without sometimes serious problems and shortcomings. That is the reason that, which is rather unprecedented, that the European Parliament, that there is a conservative, a center-right majority, 3 times denounced very strongly the current Hungarian government and the parliamentary majority. You should also know, because quite recently, a former colleague of mine, the Foreign Minister of Austria, former Foreign Minister of Austria and former colleague as Commissioner Benita Ferrero-Waldner, put me the question that, László, how is it possible that in Hungary, the current Prime Minister, Viktor Orbán, for the second time got 2/3 support, 2/3 of the country? I told that, Benita, it is not 2/3 of the country, it is 2/3 of the parliament. And it's very much different. Because just telling you the figures, we have a bit more than 8 million persons who are eligible to vote. That is the electorate. Recently, this spring, at the election, out of this a bit more than 8.1 million voters, 2.3 million voted for the current coalition. It is not even 1/3. So it's not 2/3, but it's less than 1/3 of the total electorate. As far as the votes cast, they got 44%, exactly the same number as the party of Angela Merkel got here in Germany. And with this 44%, Angela Merkel couldn't find any other way just to form a grand coalition. In Hungary, with this 44%, having in mind the very specific, modified electoral law, they got 2/3 in the parliament, with 44% of the votes cast, and with less than 1/3 of the votes of the total electorate. Now that shows that the interpretation of democracy in Hungary and the parliamentary majority is rather peculiar and quite quite exceptional and not a regular one. And having in mind this, I do believe that politics is an art of teamwork. The leader, the prime minister, should be a real leader of the government, not necessarily the leader of the whole country. To win elections, a charismatic politician alone can do a lot, but it is not certain that he will be a successful prime minister. I have the privilege, having a long career, long international career, that I know most of the prime ministers in Europe. And I do believe that most of them are not charismatic leaders in the sense that they could deliver fantastic speeches, because it is not so important. In my country, in Hungary, it is still the case that a charismatic leader who is able to deliver a fantastic speech can mobilize the electorate. But as a prime minister, he is not sure that he'll be successful. So I do believe in institutions. I think democracy should be based on democratic institutions. For instance, the checks and balances, the system of checks and balances, that guarantees that the democracy will work. Also should have a strong civil society, NGOs and other civic organizations. These are the cornerstone of democracy, and not one person, the charismatic leader, the father of the country. From the east of Hungary, you can find many countries with that kind of leader, who is the father of the country, Vladimir Putin, for instance, or the president of countries like Azerbaijan and some other former Soviet republics. They are typically that type of leaders, and democratic institutions are not strong. Therefore, democracy is guaranteed by one person and not by a network of institutions. That is the difference between the two.
Thank you very much. Bertie Ahern, since you are actually the longest-serving board member of the ICTY currently on the panel, I'd like to give you the honors of offering some words of conclusion for the panel, perhaps also responding to some of the points that were made, as well as actually this issue of institutions, and really looking ahead. And perhaps even one point we've been discussing also this weekend, you and I together, how can we really involve youth participation and civic participation as well to help actually solidify some of the efforts of institutions and political leaders? But I'd be very happy if you could help us to conclude the panel and look a little bit ahead as well.
Well, maybe just those 3 quick points then. I don't disagree with anything that's been said by the panelists, so I won't take issue with any of those. On institutions, your question, I don't really see a need for any new institution. I suppose I'll make 2 points on that. I think it's a pity that more of Kofi Annan's reforms of whatever it is now, about 7 or 8 years ago, didn't get through. I mean, he made a very gallant effort, I think, to reform the UN, and he got some of the way and others didn't get anywhere. Personally, I'd love to see the veto gone, but I'd be gone before the veto goes, I'd say. So, you know, that's unfortunately the way it is. I think it would help a lot of things. On the positive side, the European Union has made a lot of resources available towards, you know, peace and reconstruction to different organisations who are in a small way helping to make reconciliation. People who are pushing out the boat to try and get people to work together and participate together across, you know, various cultures and religious divides, and I think that's money well spent. I'm always critical. It's amazing with governments generally, and I suppose we're all guilty of this. If there's some city, let's not say City X, and there's terrible riots tonight, the government will always allocate whatever security resources are necessary. They'll put 10,000 police, they'll put the army on standby, they'll have helicopters in the air, all ready to deal with whatever riots. If it's absolutely peaceful and there's NGO organisations that need small amount of money to try and help you know, reconciliation and peace, it's almost impossible to get it. And that, I think, goes across and that's a pity. If you ask me, it's not new institutions we need, but I do think there's a necessity for organisations, and ICTY is one of them, where there is an ability to be able to get resources to do the good things that you want to do, rather than, as every organisation has to do, put a huge amount of effort into trying to get the resources to do these things. And you know that's the same everywhere. You know, senior people have to do things that they'd be better doing something else with, and I think that's a pity. And I have served on many committees where I've had that battle with administrations, but I know why it happens, but I think it's a necessity to do. The last point, I mean, I think we're here at an ICTY conference. I think you've shown the ability here, year in, year out, to be able to bring a cross-section of world people from various areas of the world, from civic society, from the legal profession, from the business profession, you know, from the political world and everything in between, artistic world, together. And I think that creates, I think, a healthy environment where the organisation can build on. And I know it takes resources, but the thorny questions, the difficult conflict zones that are holding back the world, I think that's where you have to push out. And as we see the young people want that. I mean, I think that's where young people don't want conflict. Young people don't want to be protesting. They want to be, you know, out enjoying themselves as they are here in the background tonight, celebrating something positive. That's what they want to do. They want to enjoy their Saturday night, not be afraid to walk the streets. I saw how that terror works. Some of your students here told me this morning that nightlife in Berlin goes on till 6 o'clock on a Sunday morning. In Belfast, it used to end at 6 o'clock in the evening, because if you went out at night, you would be assassinated because you happened to be living in one community or another. So I saw it both ways. So I think what we need to be trying to do is to find ways where we can positively help and assist people and help those conflict areas in the world. And I think ICTY are doing a lot to achieve that, and we want to do more, and you need money to do that.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ahern. Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, Your Excellencies, His Royal Highnesses, we are honored to have the occasion. 15 minutes ago, you may have seen on the screen behind us, was the official commemoration that exactly 25 years ago today, at 7:21 in the evening, the Berlin Wall came down. So I think it's very much appropriate that we now conclude the panel discussion and we move to the celebration part of the evening. What we're going to do now is have a brief opportunity to actually eat refreshments in the restaurant just next door in preparation for two very special concerts that I'd announced earlier. So we'll have some wonderful cultural performances here, and I think in many ways that will be an ideal occasion for us, very internationally, to commemorate this occasion. So before we move to the restaurants for the dinner and the reception, I would like to ask everyone, please, with much enthusiasm and much sincerity, to offer our thanks to all of the panelists for having traveled great distances to be here on this occasion and having shared with us their tremendous wisdom and also insights. Please, thank you very much. And maybe we could do one photo with the panelists standing before we leave the stage, and we will meet you very soon in the restaurant just next door.
Going good down there, look at the crowds.
Yeah, and I haven't seen that.
How far is that?
We're reaching one by one.
Kilometers.
20,000.
Yeah, it's lovely. The dry evening.